Hi everyone, my name's Keith. I work as a psychologist, I work as a therapist, and most of my time is spent working with people with anxiety and depression. And they come in, and we sit and we do some therapy for an hour or so, and they move along. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that people can have extraordinary achievements. They can do really, really well. They can be building up their lives and doing and achieving more and more, and yet sometimes they don't feel it. They don't feel like those things are achievements. They don't feel like those things are good enough. And one of the patterns and one of the traits that seems to be coming out of it is that those people tend to be perfectionists. That whatever they do isn't quite enough, and whatever they achieve isn't good enough. And so what we're going to talk about this evening is a little bit about why sometimes perfectionists can become depressed, and why sometimes when we're depressed we can become perfectionists, and how this can actually really hurt us, and try and find a few ways through it. So, the agenda is very clear. We're going to analyse why I'm a perfectionist, we're going to feel guilty, we're going to mull over the mistakes, we're going to fix everything, and then we're never going to make another mistake. And once we can do that, then we'll have it all solved. And although that seems ridiculous, the funny thing is that's often the way each of us goes into every day. Whether it's meeting somebody, or going to work, or going into a meeting, or trying to stand up and give a talk like this. We want to do it perfectly, and then we're going to pick out every mistake we made, and we're going to go over every mistake we ever make, and then we're just never going to ever make another mistake. And if we do that, then we'll feel all right about ourselves. And of course, that's not what happens. We do make mistakes. We do make little errors. There are little glitches. And if those little glitches really affect our self-esteem and really affect how we feel about ourselves, then we're going to feel very low, because those mistakes are going to happen. So, I suppose what we need to think about a little bit is, why would we want to make mistakes? Because who would want to make mistakes or fail or be imperfect? Surely being perfect is a good thing. That's what we should all be aspiring to. Who doesn't want to pass their exams or get their bonus or have nice parties or meet nice people or things to go really well? And shouldn't we really strive for those things all the time? Shouldn't we get up and really push for those things every day? And so perfectionism on the outside looks like a good thing. It looks like it should help us. And I think the other thing that's important to talk about here is that when I'm talking about perfectionism, I'm not just talking about a little personality trait, a quirky little bit that some people are a little bit loose and some people are a little bit more organised. I'm talking about something that's actually a bit more clinical than that, that's a bit more strict. So there are lots of different personalities in the world. Some people are laid back, and there'll be some people in the audience who feel totally laid back. And there's other people who are a little bit more rigid. Some people are Spanish, and some people are German, and that's okay. That there's just these different ways of being in the world. But we can ask the question, when does a trait perfectionism become a problem? And that becomes a problem when it's excessive, when it starts to have the opposite effect to what's intended, and when we start to feel worse about ourselves, even though we might be doing a lot. And that's when we start to talk about clinical perfectionism. Now, clinical perfectionism isn't a diagnosis and it's not a disease. It's just a way about talking about a personality trait that when it's taken to excess starts to hurt us rather than to help us. And one of the things we know from a lot of research is that people who have this extreme personality trait, it's also associated with increased risks of depression, increased risks of anxiety, of eating disorders, and lots of other mental health problems. That if we push ourselves to be perfect all the time, the person who gets hurt is us. And that often the thing that we want to happen doesn't happen because we've become hurt. So there's a wonderful book on this, and there's a real wonderful expert that if you ever want to look her up, and that's a lady called Raj Shafran, and that's her book called Overcoming Perfectionism. And it's a very easy read, it's very straightforward, and it's about €10 or so to buy. And anyone who feels like some of the things that come up today might apply to them, then that's a really good place to start. Because there'll be lots of clinical stories in it, lots of different people's stories in it, and you kind of compare, okay, does that apply to me? And do some of the ideas that Roz talks about in it, would they be useful things for me to apply in my own life? So they define perfectionism as the setting up of and striving for very demanding standards that are self-imposed and relentlessly pursued, despite this causing problems. It involves basing one's self-worth almost exclusively on how well these high standards are met. And so just take that last bit, that our self-worth is almost exclusively based on how we meet certain standards. And then think about how fragile that self-worth will become and how easy it is not to meet those standards. How easy it is for life just to throw something in the way or something to become more complicated than we thought it was. And if those standards aren't met, suddenly we stop feeling a sense of self-worth. So this is a very busy slide, so I'm going to read it out. But this is by a lady called Elena Miller, who writes a blog about perfectionism and depression and her mental health. So perfectionism has been that perfect frenemy who's tagged along with me my entire life. On the surface, she's helped me get the stuff done right, but underneath, she was always there at the worst moments to whisper cruel criticisms in my ear, no matter how hard I worked or how well I'd done. For Elena, perfectionism helped her get straight A's all the way through school, helped her get into Harvard, helped her graduate medical school, helped me go from a skinny 13-year-old with no athletic ability to a Division I college water polo player. She's helped me excel at pretty much anything I've put my mind to. But she was also there to tell me that each of these accomplishments wasn't sufficient, that I should try harder, do more, be better, that when I had achieved something difficult and was enjoying my success, she was there to whisper in my ear, not good enough. Set your sights higher. Or Jamie Varon also talks about perfectionism in his blog. Perfectionism is not about perfecting what you do, it's about keeping the fear that you will never be able to do it. And so you spin and you keep spinning. Perfectionism is about being frozen because you never want to find out that you're really not the best at something. You circle the drain and repeat old behaviours and you control what you know you can control because the idea of risking being wrong or incorrect or imperfect makes your heart race in a terrible way. Perfectionism exists in the silent way you berate yourself for not being able to do certain things. It's this insidious belief that all will be perfect and fine if only you could be perfect and fine. I'll repeat that again. It's the belief that all will be perfect and fine if only you could be perfect and fine. Perfectionism means you overthink conversations before and after you have them. You plan your words. You beat yourself up if you say something that upsets another person. You can't get close to people because people are unpredictable. And unpredictability means you can't be perfect. And so you contain what you can't control when you can. So something that seems positive and seems nice and seems like we should all be looking for it, in fact, has the opposite effect on us. It attacks us and our sense of who we are. It attacks how we feel good about ourselves. It attacks our own sense of self-worth. And so sometimes then the more we strive for something, actually the more we're hurting ourselves with it. So when we look at the common effects of perfectionism, emotionally we find perfectionists often worry a lot and have a lot of low mood. Physically, they can feel very tired and have poor sleep and muscle tension. Cognitively, they can end up ruminating. That means worrying and going over and over in their minds. They can end up catastrophizing, so making things seem huge and awful. It increases levels of self-criticism and it lowers people's self-esteem. And in terms of their behaviour, there's often repeated checking, taking too much time to do a task, being over-thorough, and then either that or total procrastination and avoidance, not doing the thing at all. And when you see those sort of symptoms, you can see how easy that will be to map onto depression. That how close we are to talking about the things that happen to us when we're depressed. The mood we feel, the thoughts we have, and the things that we do. So paradoxically, you often see perfectionism in people who have achieved a lot, but we see it everywhere. But there is this paradox. The better somebody does, the worse that they feel about themselves. So they set a goal and they get it, and they feel bad because they should have done it quicker, faster, better, in a different sort of way, somehow, some other way. And I'd often see that in people recovering from depression. They will have gone and achieved something that they've really wanted to. So maybe they've got back to work or gone back to seeing friends and immediately beat themselves up because they should have not had to be here in the first place. So they should have been able to do it sooner, or it shouldn't have taken them 2 goes to do it, or it should have been something else. That somehow that high, perfect standard they set ruins the thing that's perfectly good. So, let's see if this works. If it's not, any imperfection is intentional, and it's a learning aid. That's why there's like 2 little arrows down the bottom for no reason. So let's see if this works. So what we're going to talk through is how perfectionism develops and then how it keeps operating in ourselves. And so perfectionism often starts with low self-esteem. And you wouldn't imagine that necessarily. People are working really hard and striving really hard, that it's coming out of actually feeling really low themselves. And partly that's because the person feels low, that they work so hard to try and cover up the gaps, to try and paper over that feeling. And so that leads then to very rigid standards and high expectations. I must be this. I should always be that. I should always achieve this. I should never let myself down. I should never not do this. I should always be nice to my friends. I should never lose my temper. I should never get cranky with anyone. I should always be smiling. I should always be the best friend. I should always be the best wife. I should always be the best husband. And then what happens is that person with those very rigid standards, but low self-esteem, has a task. They have to go do something. So they have to come to a lecture on a Wednesday night, or they have to give a lecture on a Wednesday night, or they have to go out into the world and do something. And once you do a task, only 3 things can happen. You can complete the task, so you temporarily meet the standard. You've done it. You can not complete the task, so for some reason it doesn't work out, so you don't meet the standard. Or you can avoid the task altogether and not be there. So if this is turning up to a day's work, you can go and do a day's work. You can go and do a day's work that doesn't quite work out. You can stay at home in bed. Those are your 3 possible options. Same with school, the same with the relationship, the same with meeting friends, the same with college, the same with anything we do. We do it, we don't do it, or we avoid it. And what happens with people who are perfectionists is if they do it, they go and they do the thing that they set out to do. They meet the standard. They immediately go, well, I should have been able to do that anyway. That's dead easy. Everyone can do that. That's why am I getting excited about that? There's no use in that. Everyone does a day's work. They immediately undermine it. It's immediately not good enough. They immediately haven't, this thing they've set out to do, it doesn't matter. Or, for whatever reason, they don't meet it. So they don't get to come to the lecture on the Wednesday. The traffic gets stuck. They get tired. It's been a long day. They don't make it. Or they get anxious about it and get anxious about the pressure of those standards and decide, actually, I won't do it, and avoid. And in all 3 scenarios, the same thing happens. They criticize themselves. So no matter what they do, whether they meet the standard, don't meet the standard, or avoid the standard, they end up beating themselves up. So I do it, I don't do it, or I avoid it, and I still feel bad. And that obviously has one effect. It pushes their self-esteem down. And that's the crux. The harder the person works, the more they achieve, the harder they push at it, their self-esteem goes down. And so for lots of people, the harder you work, your self-esteem goes up. But when people are perfectionists, when those standards are too high or too rigid, their self-esteem goes down and they feel worse. So it's a bit of a strange paradox. It's not necessarily what people expect. It's not necessarily what intuitively comes to mind. I'm sure we can ask some questions and talk about it a little bit afterwards. But this is what happens with perfectionists and why it's so easy then to become depressed. Because the harder they're working, the more they're doing, the worse they feel about themselves. So for instance, someone says, I should always, do whatever my job is, I should always meet my targets. Something comes up, they meet the target, then immediately they knock it, oh, that's the minimum I should do. Everyone gets their target. What's the point? Or they don't meet the target, or they procrastinate and they avoid meeting the manager altogether. Whatever happens, it always comes back to self-criticism. They're beating themselves up at the end of it. Or they have the standard, I should always be a good mum. And lots of people have this standard, because who would want to be a bad mum? So we often have the standard, I should always be a good mum. But the problem there is the rigidity of it. Always. Because actually, which of us is always going to be anything? Which of us is always going to be the perfect mum, or the perfect husband, or the perfect father? And so, this person who wants to be the perfect mum brings their toddler to the supermarket, and the toddler is going to do what the toddler is going to do. It's going to kick and scream and pull the shelves down and want the sweets. And suddenly this person who wants to be the perfect mum feels really exposed, because they can't be perfect and have this toddler. And so they choose to do something. They comfort the child. But then they knock themselves, because actually that's the minimum. Any parent can do that. Or they aren't able to comfort the child. They aren't able to get control of this toddler. And then they beat themselves up for being a terrible mum and, not able to mind my own child. Or I won't go to the supermarket at all, and we'll just, make do with baked beans until Sunday. So we don't have to deal with the issue. And again, it comes back to criticizing themselves and feeling worse about themselves. So what we're going to spend the rest of the talk doing is those are just some examples and some kind of pictures of how perfectionism works and how it maps onto depression. What we're going to do for the rest is talk about, what can we do about it? Because actually lots of kind of sensible, practical things we can do about this. And if we have a tendency towards criticizing ourselves, or if we have a tendency towards low self-esteem, actually we don't have to stay doing that. There's lots of stuff we can change. And so what we're going to look at is looking at some of those rules, some of those high standards and expectations. We're going to look at that where we undermine ourselves and undermine our achievements. We're going to look at avoidance, and we're going to look at self-criticism. And we can make small changes to all of those things. That's in our power. And if we do those things, actually the perfectionism comes down a little bit, and the self-criticism comes down a little bit, and our mood picks up a little bit, and we start to feel a bit better about ourselves. So when we're thinking about rigid standards and expectations, so I'm just going to take some water before I get a frog in my throat, and then we really would be in trouble. So, lots of therapy and lots of psychologists and lots of things that people will have come across will say goals are good. We need goals. And that's definitely true. If we don't have any goals, then we're a bit aimless and it's easy to get stuck. But sometimes goals aren't simple. Sometimes they're competing. What if I want to be a good parent, but I also want to be a good employee? Lots of people get caught with this. I want to work hard, but I also want to be with my family. And yet I can't be in the two places at once. I want to be a good friend, but I also want to get my exams. When my friends are out having a party and my exams are based in the library, I can't do both. And so often our goals compete. And it's not easy if our goals are rigid to do both. We get pulled in too many directions. Sometimes our goals aren't within our control. We can't manage, the whole world is in our control. So we may have a goal of being better at something or wanting to achieve something, but actually maybe that isn't ours to control. We can try, we can put our best foot forward, we can try and move something down the road, but maybe we can't actually control the whole world for this thing to actually happen. And so what we find is that goals aren't a bad thing in themselves, but if they become rigid, then they do become a bad thing. So if somebody says, I should always be this, then they're in trouble. Because we can't always be anything. We can't always be nice, we can't always be kind, we can't always be good, we can't always be hardworking, we can't always be a good neighbour, we can't always be a good father, can't always be a good husband. We can try to be that thing most of the time. We can do our best to be that thing. But we're human beings as well. We will not be that thing all the time. I should never get angry. I should never get cross. I should never get upset. I should never. This is also impossible. We're human beings. We're going to get angry. We're going to get cross. I should never stay in bed. We're going to stay in bed. I should never make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. And so if we have rigid rules for ourselves, then we're setting ourselves up for criticism and we're setting ourselves up for failure. And often people have very strong beliefs about failure. I can't fail. I shouldn't fail. If I failed, it's because I haven't worked hard enough, I haven't prepared hard enough, I haven't done enough. And so perfectionism stems from a dissatisfaction with where you are and who you are, and because of that, nothing is ever good enough. When I have X, then I'll be happy. When you get it, you just want something else. Everyone needs to hold themselves to the same standards I do, but they don't, and you get frustrated. And if you don't park in the yellow box, well, there's lots of other people who will park in the yellow box, and if you get annoyed at them, you're going to spend a lot of time annoyed. You can see I spend a lot of time in traffic trying to get across town this evening. I can do whatever I set my mind to. You can, but at what cost? And I need to be perfect to be loved. Well, then we're in real trouble, because none of us is going to be perfect. We can be human, we can be good enough, but we can't be perfect. So this is something that people may have come across before, which is the law of diminishing returns. So the people who know this best are professional sports people. They have this absolutely perfectly down, and it's about their body, because their body is their business. And what happens is, the more effort we put in, the more outcome we get. For the first hour, for the second hour, for the third hour. But after that, the more effort we put in, the less outcome we get. And the more we put in, the less, and the less, and the less. So if you go to the gym, I don't know how, and you get on the treadmill, the first kilometre, you'll be going great. Second kilometre, still going fine. Third kilometre, a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. If you're studying, you're trying to concentrate, the first half hour is great, everything's going in, you're remembering everything. Second half hour, still good, still remembering stuff. Third, fourth, fifth, we go all the way down. Same with being social. The same with any task that we're trying to do. As we put more effort in, we achieve stuff initially, and then stuff goes down and down and down. And where professional sports people are brilliant is they know when to stop. They know when to take a break, and the physio comes on, and they get the ice packs, and they go in the showers, and they have all their recuperation routine built in. They know exactly what to do. There's a whole team of people who rush on to look after them. But we're normal people. So we don't have that team of people that says, stop, you've done enough, now go to the showers. Actually, we have to do that ourselves. We have to know, okay, I've done enough now. That was good effort. I'm going to stop and I'm going to look after myself. I'm going to do the thing that I need now. I've done this much for the goal. I've tried to achieve it this much. Now actually I'm going to look after myself a little bit. And that we balance the hard work that we do with self-care and looking after ourselves. And there's a little bit of us that says, no, I'll just work harder. I'll just do more. But what happens is we actually achieve less and less and less once we go past that point. So stop. So when we're thinking about our standards or goals, what if we engage in flexible standards? What would they be like? What would we prioritize if our standards were kind of flexible and open? I'd like to be a good person most of the time, but it's okay if I lose my temper. I'd like to work hard, but every now and again I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to doss off. I'd like to achieve the things I want in my life, but I know I can't control how everything comes and the speed that it's going to come at. That I have goals, but I'm also looking for recovery and recuperation and balance. There's things I want, but there's also that I need to look after myself in order to get them. So I might want to do well in work, but I know there's going to be ups and downs. I might want to be a good enough parent, but lots of my kids' behaviour and development is not in my control. There's so many factors in life that I can't control them all. I can only control my little bit and try to do my best about my little bit. And that things not working is part of living. And that's an uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth. That not everything we set our minds to will actually come to fruition. And if that hits us very hard on a level of self-esteem, then that hurts too much. But if we can say, well, okay, that's part of life. That's how life works. There's ups and downs to it. Then we can get up again and go and do the next thing. So we're talking about rules. The next thing I want to talk about is then when we do achieve something, and when people then often undermine it, ourselves, worst of all. So is there any of my achievements that I run down? Now, this is to an Irish audience. So that means 100% of you run down every one of your achievements 100% of the time. I don't know what it is about growing up in Ireland. I don't know if it's part of the Leaving Cert, but we are not allowed to take a compliment or praise ever. And there's a joke, I don't know if it's a true joke, but some Polish people, having lived in Ireland for a while, went home and they misunderstood English. And from the English they learned in Dublin. And so someone would say something and they'd say, pennies, thanks. As if that's how we actually, that's a nice jumper, pennies, thanks. That was a good talk, pennies, thanks. And that actually we are not able just to say, thank you. I like this jumper too. Thank you. This was okay. We're not able to take a compliment or enjoy praise or acknowledge your own hard work. If someone says, that was good, yeah, I'm really pleased with it. Yeah, I hope it was good. And recognize that something we do is good, even if it's not unique, even if it's not perfect. And so we can be a good parent, even though hopefully everyone on our street is also a good parent. I'm a psychologist. I work in a corridor that's only made up of psychologists. And I hope I hope I'm a good psychologist, but I hope everyone else in that corridor is a good psychologist as well. And the same with being a husband, or the same with anything that we do, that we can just be good at it, or sort of good some of the time. And that we don't have to run ourselves down because it's not a perfect, unique achievement. So what do you think my chances are of actually changing Ireland so that we could take a compliment if somebody said something nice to us? Are we thinking zero? Yeah. Okay. So it's actually okay just to own these things. And when we do, there's a positive feeling that comes from it. When someone says, you look nice, just saying, thank you. Saying, that was good. I'm really pleased with it. That I did this thing and it's okay. I don't have to climb Everest before I, take a positive comment on board. And I don't have to run down everything I do just because someone else has also done it as well. Because in reality, most of the things that we do in our lives, some of the other 8 billion people in the world are also doing it. We don't have these perfect, unique achievements. So then we think about avoidance. And one of the things but I've worked in Ireland for the last 5 years, and I worked in the UK for 5 years before that, and part of that I was working in Oxfordshire for the NHS. And if you work for the NHS in Oxfordshire, you get lots of students from Oxford University who come through that service. And so they're all super, super bright people. But one of the things that was cropping up is that perfectionism was a big deal, and depression was a big deal there. And you would meet these people with amazingly high IQs and all of that, but they would not have handed in a paper since, for 6 months. Or they would have skipped all their exams. So they're going to get 0. And what that was about was the fear of getting a B was so high that they actually just got frozen and would get an F. get 0. Because they couldn't get 100, they couldn't get the... And again, maybe this is the good thing about coming from Dublin. It's kind of ordinary. Well, would you not be happy with 41? Would you not just do it? And no, no was the answer. And that's what happens in perfectionism, that we can't just do enough, can't just do a bit of it. We have to have it all, or we end up with nothing. And so we get a lot of people for whom procrastination and avoidance is a huge issue. Because if it can't be perfect, then it becomes nothing. Like they get frozen and they can't put in half a paper or do half a day's work or half an achievement. It has to be all of it. And so this often means that the person won't start or won't take on the task or won't do a bit of the task or won't work incrementally or won't gradually build something up over time because they can't be perfect at it day one, the first time they do it. And so the anxiety associated with maybe failing is so strong that they're unable to do even the simple stuff. And of course, we all have a risk of failing. That's, when we start something off. If we go to the gym, there's a fair chance we're not necessarily going to become, Olympic marathon runners overnight. It's not necessarily, we may fail. And that avoidance, that fear of failing, stopping us doing anything, reinforces our low mood, reinforces our negative beliefs about ourselves, and stops any sort of ability to progress and create any momentum. And that person's low self-esteem gets reinforced because, well, look, a month has gone by and I still haven't tackled this thing. 2 months have gone by and I still haven't started this thing. 3 months have gone by, still haven't started this thing. How bad am I? So there's lots of ways to avoid. Some ways we just, don't do it. Sometimes we get very busy with other tasks. So I should be doing this, but the office is very messy. I'm just going to clean everything and then I'll do this thing. I would do it, but I have this cold. I would do it, but actually Anne is much better than me at doing it, and so I might just leave it to her to do it. I would do it, but actually it's someone else's issue, or not my fault, or something I shouldn't have to do in the first place, or something I don't want to tackle, and it becomes a reason why I'm not going to take it on. Or I can't do it because I'm too upset. And that can often happen, where we get overwhelmed by the issue so much that we're not able to tackle the thing that's in front of us. And so one of the things about tackling things for the first time, or beginning things, or taking on things that we're not very good at yet, is that we will feel anxious. We can't not feel anxious doing it. Everything from the very first day, so it's October, so all the kids started school about a month ago, all the little 4 and 5-year-olds going in the gate the first day, leaving their mums and dads, they all feel terrified. First day of school, first day of secondary school, first day of work, first day of everything, we feel frightened. And that's okay, that's a very normal part of being alive, but we still have to take that first step, and we still have to go and do the thing. And so we have to do the task anyway, even if we're worried that we might fail at it. And what we try and do is gradually and incrementally chip away at it, whatever the thing we're trying to do is, just a little bit at a time. And it's the cliche that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We don't achieve it with the first step. We don't achieve it with the second step. We don't achieve it with the third step. We just have to put each piece one after another, after another. And there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear as we're putting in those small little steps, but it's the only way that anything has ever been achieved. And so the last bit then we want to talk a little about is self-criticism, which anyone with depression will really recognize, and anyone with perfectionism will really recognize. And that people are very self-critical. They are hard on themselves in a way they would never be hard on another person. They are aggressive in their own heads in a way they'd never be aggressive to a neighbor or a stranger or a family member. They're hard on themselves. And often it's because people who are perfectionists have the belief that self-criticism is useful. It's a good thing to do. So it drives me forward. I need to get a higher standard. So come on, stupid, get this done. And when I don't get it done, well, that's stupid too. And ultimately, that self-criticism leads to a lowering of self-esteem as no standard is high enough. And the criticism then becomes relentless. As you never meet it, all you're left with is criticism and criticism and criticism and criticism. And that repeated criticism is very hard, even if it's only your own mind that's saying it. Or maybe especially because it's your own mind that's saying it. And so our confidence goes down, and our ability to tackle the things that we're trying to tackle in life goes down with it. I want to talk a little bit, just for a minute or two. There's two different types of confidence they talk about. One is swing confidence and one is core confidence. And swing confidence is where, when things are going well, we feel brilliant. We're on top of the world, we can do everything. But then as things start to go badly, it swings and we feel terrible and awful. And that's often the type of confidence that perfectionists have. That when they're flying and they're getting the marks and everything is being achieved, brilliant, on top of the world. And as soon as it ebbs away, I'm the worst. And it goes. Core confidence is where you know you're pretty good anyway. Even if it's not your day, even if it's not going right, even if the thing you put your mind to isn't happening, you're still, okay, I'm still pretty solid at this. I'm having a bad day, this isn't working for me, but I know I'm still fundamentally okay. And it's easy to develop the swing confidence, and it's harder to develop the core confidence. And one of the key bits of that is that we don't criticize ourselves every day that isn't a good day. We actually try and build ourselves up. I say, no, I'm not having a good day, but I am doing my best despite it being a tough day. And that kind of self-talk is really, really important. So self-criticism is easy to develop, and it's often come from genuine criticism, other places in our lives where people have been critical of us. And it's very easy for coaches or teachers or parents to have been critical of us. And often they have been critical of us with the best intentions at heart. We get gold stars for good work, but we either don't get the gold star or we get something worse for bad work. And again, we talk about the kids going into primary, so whatever, junior infants now, they'll be getting gold stars and not so gold stars. They're getting smiley faces and angry faces all the way up. We get medals for achievement. But we don't actually get medals for effort. And so we're trained very early through school and through parenting that you get stuff for achieving. But in life, actually, the thing you most need is effort and the ability to keep an effort going over time. And that's how achievement is attained, not through any kind of magic ability. And so we are given medals for achievement, but achievement isn't a methodology for happiness. We need more than just achieving stuff to be happy. We have to actually be happy in ourselves. And that's the bit that we need to train. That actually, I'm happy being me, whether it's a good talk or a bad talk, whether it's a good day or a bad day, that I'm okay, not perfect, not without faults, but okay. And learning how to be okay is really important. And it's the thing that we should be trying to teach all our kids, but hopefully teach ourselves as we go along as well. So there's the potential here for a very positive cycle. And that's where you'd build up a resilient self-esteem. Self-esteem that's there when it's going well, but also there when it's not going well. That on a bad day or a bad week, that actually I am pretty good. I'm okay. That we have flexible expectations. That we recognize that the world isn't always going to be straightforward, and the thing that we want isn't always easily achieved, and that I can set my goals, but sometimes I have to adjust. We can recognize that sometimes we're going to meet our target and the thing we want, and that when we do, it's really important to praise ourselves. That was well done. I did well there. Good for me. But sometimes we're not going to meet that target. Through no fault of our own, just stuff happens. and that's part of living too. And really importantly, not to avoid taking it on, but to work incrementally, one little chunk at a time, one little bite at a time. And as all these things happen, owning the positive events and stepping back from the negative ones. Owning the stuff that we do well and not taking to heart the stuff that doesn't work out. And so if we can work like this, I think we're coming to the last slide. I thought that was the last slide. I think this is it. If we can work like this, we can build a robust self-esteem, able to protect our mood from things that might happen to us. And that life will throw obstacles, but we're able to manage it better. It's not a life without obstacles, but they don't have to hurt us on a core level when they come along. And that we can be happy with the things that we achieve, because when you speak to people, people are achieving all the time. They're just not achieving to this impossible standard that they have in their own mind. And so if we can actually be happy with the things we can achieve, then we can genuinely be happy. Okay, thanks very much.